Today, we're talking about budgeting, which actually you refer to as a spending plan. Why is that distinction important for you?
I think language matters quite a bit, right? As soon as we say the word budget, everybody gets kind of tight, Similar to diet, as soon as you say, oh, I'm on a diet, people are like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
It really, versus if you say I'm meal planning, people think, oh, there's sort of some convenience in that, some access in that. Like, oh, you never get hangry, that must be wonderful. And the same thing with budgeting. If I say I'm creating a spending plan, then it's a little bit more like, oh, this is how I get to spend my money rather than how I don't get to spend my money.
Yeah. So where do we start with a spending plan?
The first step for everybody is figuring out how much income you make. And for those who have a salary, it's a little bit easier to figure out your check is the same, but increasingly people are earning money in a variable way. So they're earning it hourly, by contract, on commission, seasonal, and those sorts of incomes are a little bit harder to predict what you're going to make. And so for folks like that, the first step would be to figure out what your take-home pay has been for the last year and divide by 12. And then if you have a lot of variability, it could be $3,500 this month and $4,000 the next month and $2,500 then multiply that average by 90%.
Okay. So then once we have figured out how much we have coming in,
yes,
then do we figure out how much we're going to put out, how much we spend?
Yes, then we have to look at our expenses.
Okay.
So once we have our income sort of figured out, an average income, then we're going to look at our expenses in 3 ways. The first category is fixed expenses. Our fixed expenses are going to be things that have a due date, a consequence if you don't pay them, and they're about the same every month. So that would be things like your rent and your utilities, your minimum debt payments, a bus pass, things where you don't really get an emotional lift when you spend more on them. They're just sort of part of your everyday expenses. The second category is your flexible expenses. These are things that will vary, but you do pay for them month to month. Things like food, gifts, clothing, entertainment. There's not necessarily an amount that you have to spend, and you do get an emotional lift when you spend more on them. And then lastly, things that can throw us off are the infrequent purchases. And so making sure that we're putting money aside for things that come up once or twice a year, things like a dental copay or your insurance or registration for your vehicle, a HOA payment, things like that that can throw off our budget.
I thought it was interesting what you said there about food, because I always think about food as being one of those fixed costs, right? Like it's like, oh, you put X amount away for groceries every month and carry on, but you said that it's more flexible than that.
Food is inherently joyful, and because our grocery stores sell everything from food to clothing to nail polish, it's at our highest risk for overspending. So it's one of those categories that can really throw off a family's budget. And we do get a lift when we spend on it. It's convenient, it's fun, it's social, it's all of these things. And so food is one of those things that we have to be mindful of how much we're spending, especially right now as grocery prices increase.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it is. Every month it's something else, right?
Yeah.
Lauren, what if you really are spending more than you're bringing in? Like, how do you get through a spending plan when that is the state that you're in right now?
Yeah, lots of Canadians are facing this right now with interest rates, with the price of groceries. The first thing to do, and these sort of sound easier said than done, is to reduce your budget to the bare bones. You want to cut back as much as you can in the areas that are extra, so in that flexible category, and anywhere in the infrequent that you can cut back. Maybe your holiday savings has to be trimmed a bit. The next step is to try to increase your income. Again, another thing that's easier said than done, but after that, if you still can't make it work, reach out to a credit counselor, and they can get you in contact with community services that might be able to help you get rent assistance, access Edmonton's leisure access pass to the rec centers. There's lots of services that are available, food banks that we may or may not be utilizing. There's a Sikh group in the southeast that does groceries on Saturday mornings. There's places to go, and I think a lot of Edmontonians and Albertans aren't aware of it. And then if debt is your major issue, reach out to a licensed insolvency trustee and talk about your debt.
Yeah. I know we will be talking about savings more, but can we talk about how savings fits into budgeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Savings equals safety.
Okay.
So for me, what I recommend for all of my clients is when you look at your 3 categories of expenses and you look at fixed, I recommend that you add 5 to 10% of the total of that. So if your fixed expenses every month is $2,000, I recommend trying to fit in $200 as a cushion in that account. So I have a client who calls it their lookout, to have their back in the case that something goes wrong, or in the case that your power bill fluctuates, or the case that something jumps. Building savings in automatically, you can do things like rounding up. If your rent is $1,700, you could put $1,800 aside, that sort of thing. Savings is going to be something that we're going to talk about a whole segment because it is so important and there's lots of strategies to approach it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. That is what we were talking about next. And again, I know there's a lot of information, but we are trying to make it as easy as possible for people. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.